Our opening thought this morning comes from Jonathan Rauch and his work, The Constitution of Knowledge, A Defense of Truth. He writes, "Minorities are always better off in a culture which protects dissent than in a culture which protects us from dissent." Our next reading is from Timothy Snyder and his work, Thinking the 20th Century. He writes, "This is pluralism, not a synonym of relativism, but rather an antonym. Pluralism accepts the moral reality of different kinds of truth, but rejects the idea that they can all be placed on a single scale, measured by a single value." Our next reading comes from Simone Campbell and her work, A Nun on the Bus, How All of Us Can Create Hope, Change, and Community. She writes, while I do this work because of my faith, I also recognize, of course, that in a pluralistic society, there are many different perspectives. It is both unrealistic and wrong to insist that everyone hold my views, my faith. The place we meet in our differences is in the founding documents of our democratic republic. When people think about the values that are most important to them, when we're asked to list values that we think are really essential to who we are and what we believe and our understanding of community, I think that sometimes one of the overlooked values is the value of pluralism. We often talk about peace, and diversity gets at pluralism, and we talk about justice and love and community, and sometimes we overlook this value of pluralism. But I think it's one of the core values of beloved community. And when we try to gain unity through the suppression of pluralism, it ends up being forced conformity rather than freedom in beloved community. It's so important to hold to pluralism. Accepting pluralism is a humble recognition that there is more than one way to understand the reality in which we live, and that we might actually have something to learn from persons with views rather than our own. The humble acceptance of pluralism is especially important as it relates to religious pluralism. Religions are at their most dangerous and most deadly when their adherents believe that their way is the only way, which can be seen in the horrific history of crusades, inquisitions, colonial conquests, and religiously inspired wars and genocide. I embrace the reality of pluralism in how we orient ourselves to religion. And personally, I don't find it helpful to make normative claims about the orthodoxy of religious doctrines and beliefs. Currently, right now, in my denomination within Christianity, United Methodism, there's a big debate going on now about what is orthodox and what is historic as part of the Christian faith. I don't find it helpful to make normative claims about what is orthodox within my religion or about religious doctrines and beliefs. In my experience, such claims tend to bring division. They also tend to bring violence rather than love and justice within the human community. I find wisdom in the teachings of religions other than my own. I also find wisdom in viewpoints within my own religion that are different than my own. I also find wisdom in the thought of atheists and agnostics and humanists. I think we can all learn from one another as we live into beloved community, as long as we practice doing no harm. to one another, as long as we allow others to think and feel about religion as they so choose, rather than enforcing orthodoxy of belief and practice. I believe that our human community is enriched by religious pluralism. Our society is better when we have persons who orient themselves to religion differently. And my hope is that all persons might find their ways to orient themselves to religion that help them become the most loving and flourishing persons that they are able to be, even when those views might be somewhat radically different than my own. Looking at my own faith tradition, I don't believe that a person becomes less Christian by learning from the wisdom of persons who orient themselves differently to religion. Imagine what a loss for the world it would have been had Howard Thurman and Martin Luther King Jr. not engaged the teachings of Mohandas Gandhi just because Gandhi was not a Christian. What a loss it would have been if Martin Luther King Jr. had not engaged the wisdom and befriended Thich Nhat Hanh just because Thich Nhat Hanh was a Buddhist monk. And this is true of other religions as well. Imagine what a loss for the world it would have been if Gandhi had not engaged the thought of Olive Schreiner in South Africa, just because she was not a Hindu. And what if Thich Nhat Hanh had not learned from the thought of Martin Luther King Jr. just because he was not a Buddhist? We all need each other, and we have so much to learn from each other in a pluralistic, beloved community. In looking at the value of pluralism within my own faith tradition of Christianity, I think it's important to remember that what we experience as Christianity is various forms of institutionalization of the Jesus movement. That's kind of a mouthful, so I'll repeat it. I think it's important to remember that what we experience as Christianity is various forms of institutionalization of the Jesus movement. If this institutionalization had not occurred, Christianity would not exist today. Christianity would not exist today without institutionalization, because religious movements require institutionalization for their survival. That's kind of a long accepted fact in the sociology of religion. If a religion is going to survive, the movement must be institutionalized in some way. In the process of institutionalization, beliefs and practices become often codified into doctrine. And this doctrine is used to create a sense of religious identity that will persist over time. And this, in turn, supports the stability and viability of the religious institution. So what we know about Jesus primarily comes to us through the writings that occurred, that were written down during the process of the institutionalization of the Jesus movement. As is the case with the institutionalization of all religious movements, this process is influenced by a number of factors. It's influenced by religious, cultural, and economic factors. This process of institutionalization is a human process. And like all human processes, it is subject to human fallibility and all of our human frailties. As Christianity became co-opted by the Roman Empire in the 4th century CE, the cultural, political, and economic influences on the institutionalization of Christianity come more directly from the empire. which had political and economic interest in seeing Christianity unified under a prescribed set of beliefs and practices that were conducive to the well-being of the empire. The most widely accepted creedal statements within the institution of Christianity today, the creedal statements that carry the most authority within Christianity today, were formed during the 4th century as the empire used violence, exile, and execution to enforce a set of doctrines conducive to imperial interests. A plurality of views about Christianity was not in the empire's interest for conformity and order. This history should lead us all to have some humility about what we think we know about the actual person of Jesus. We see Jesus through the lenses of the processes of the institutionalization of Christianity. And sometimes these lenses may not give us the clearest picture and may actually obscure our vision of who Jesus was and what he actually did. What we think is a set of orthodox doctrines about Jesus may be more of a product of Christianity's institutionalization than it is an actual, accurate portrayal of Jesus. And thus, it is possible that attempts to enforce adherence to a particular set of doctrines, rather than allowing for a pluralism of views, might be more about the protection of the institution of Christianity than it is about following Jesus. The acceptance of religious pluralism and pluralism in thought and action in general is vital for the maintenance of a vibrant democracy and also for the freedom and flourishing of persons within beloved community. Every authoritarian and autocratic movement within religions and outside of religions rejects the value of pluralism in society. Every authoritarian and autocratic movement rejects the value of pluralism within society. Nationalism, especially religious nationalism, is built on the rejection of pluralism, which is expressed through actions that discriminate against and oppress persons who are considered to be the other. The value of embracing pluralism not only contributes to our learning from views that are different than our own, it also helps us realize that we can be one beloved and diverse human community, not in spite of our differences, but actually because we accept and embrace our differences. Our diversity contributes to the overall flourishing and well-being of all persons within community. Community flourishes not because we are the same. Community flourishes because we embrace and celebrate each other in our differences. Our diversity contributes to the overall flourishing and well-being of all persons within community. Acceptance of pluralism is at the very core of a free and democratic society. The Unitarian Universalist movement has much to share in regard to this value of pluralism. It's a value that has been celebrated and accepted within Unitarian Universalism for many, many years. It's a value that can be modeled for the rest of society, even when we might not agree with what the rest of society is saying and doing and believing. It's still something that we can model for others and live into it as we accept diversity, embrace diversity within beloved community. Our parting thought comes from Sulak Sivaraksa, from Seeds of Peace, a Buddhist Vision for renewing society. It is not a Buddhist approach to say that if everyone practiced Buddhism, the world would be a better place. Wars and oppression begin from this kind of thinking.